Good morning and good evening, my great students. Let's start out today's class with a little tune. Now, let me explain. We are learning about some major historical events that have significant impact on our country's history. So let's start with a little bit of a review. The Boston Massacre, you learned about it yesterday with Mrs. Solchek or with myself, depending on your class period. But was this really a massacre? No, it was not really a massacre. But why this is such a historic event is because the people in Boston were fed up and tired of having the British soldiers in their community. And so this is what happens. The soldiers began throwing snowballs at the troops. The troop gets knocked down. In response to this, they begin firing on the crowd of colonists. 5 people die. Only 5 people. But yet, what the Sons of Liberty do is they take this knowledge and they turn it into a propaganda campaign. Paul Revere, who you may know from the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, which I'm sure we'll read in class someday soon. But in Paul Revere, what he does is he takes the significance of these messages and he turns it into some prints, and you guys looked at those prints yesterday. Now, the hope for the Sons of Liberty is that it starts a rebellion and it keeps in the minds of the citizens that they need to revolt from England. However, that does not happen. It does not work. And actually, on the very same day of the Boston Massacre, March 4th, 10th, March, we'll just go with March 1770, the Townshend Acts are repealed. And so because of this, it overshadows the Boston Massacre because the Boston Massacre really only takes place and it really only impacts the city of Boston. So the Sons of Liberty, they kind of fail. But then, about a year and a half, almost 2 years later, in May of 1773, Lord North says, we need our tax on tea. And even though there's always this tax on tea, because after the Townshend Acts, there was one tax that was not repealed. But then there is a new Tea Act that comes out in May 1770. Lord North at this time is the Parliament's prime minister. And what this does is it actually reduces the cost of tea because they're sitting on 17 million pounds of tea and they really want to get rid of it. So they lower the cost in order to make the tea cheaper. However, there is still a tax on the tea, and the colonists are upset by this tax because there is taxation without representation. And this upsets them. But what makes it even worse is that the British East India Company actually creates a monopoly on the tea industry. And this infuriates the colonists. They get so upset by this because they're like, what's next? How much else is England going to control? Same thing happened when President Obama passed Obamacare. They believe that if this happens, what else can our president do? But moving on. When the tea ships finally arrive into Boston Harbor, angry colonists greet these tea ships. And these tea ships become bombarded with these English colonists, getting very, very upset with them. Massachusetts colonial governor, who is an Englishman, says these ships are staying in the harbor until they get unloaded. So what happens next? Well, the Sons of Liberty say, hey, you know what? We'll help them get it unloaded. So they, in the midst of the night, they sneak on board of these ships, but they don't want to destroy the ships. They are very careful and meticulous in their job. And they actually go through and they pick the locks rather than breaking the locks because they don't want any damage to the ship. That, in their opinion, is going too far. They want to send a very strong message to England. And that message is that they're not going to be bullied around. So they take the tea and they throw it overboard. They get rid of all that tea, and it is a wonderful sight. John Adams rejoices in the fact of this. King George, the mean old King George, his crown is broken there. But mean old King George, what he does is he's like, I need to get control of this. And it's kind of like when you guys rebel against your parents. King George is the parent of the colonies, and the colonies are the 13 kids. And these kids are running all over the place, and they're just going crazy. And King George is like, I need to bring down the hammer. And he wants to make life really difficult. And so he creates 4 acts called the Intolerable Acts. The first act says Boston Harbor is going to be closed. Sorry, closed for business. It will be closed until all of the tea that is paid for. Second, oh, is that backwards? That number 2 is backwards. Second, the Massachusetts government is going to be placed under England's control. They can't even hold town meetings without England's approval. Third, British soldiers who are convicted of murder are going to be tried in England. And last but not least, more troops are going to be sent to Massachusetts to make sure these new laws are abided by. Many Bostonians actually say we would rather see our city in flames than pay for a cent of that tea. They would rather see their city burn up, everything destroyed, before paying for any of that tea. That's how much they felt. That's how much they hated this Tea Act. Other colonies begin to unite behind Boston. They think that the king has gone too far. Virginia in particular starts to unite. And this leads to the First Continental Congress. And what is the Congress again? This is the second Congress that we've talked about. The first one was the Stamp Act Congress. And in the Stamp Act Congress, it was a meeting of 9 out of the 13 colonies. And they sent a message to the king asking for the repeal of the Stamp Act. In this second meeting, it is called the First Continental Congress. Continental being a continent. 12 out of the 13 colonies meet this time. And they meet in Philadelphia. And some of the most ardent patriots stress that the English colonies need to quit thinking themselves about independent colonies. Patrick Henry says, I am not a Virginian, I am an American. And this is where we start to see the colonies really start to form and unite. And they have so many disagreements and they don't agree on a whole lot of things, but they do agree on a couple of things. The first thing that they do agree on is they need to send King George a message, because King George and his laws are out of control. They are running havoc. He is overstepping his bounds. He is being a tyrannical king in which he is making all of these rules and saying all of these things without the people's approval. And so they decide to send a respectful message to King George to consider their complaints and recognize their rights as people and as citizens, because they still really think of themselves as citizens of England. However, they are starting to change that. The other thing that this Continental Congress agrees on is to boycott British goods until the repeal of the Intolerable Acts. And this is big. This is the third time that we've had a boycott. And every single boycott has really hurt the pocketbooks of the English government. And if we remember, and you should know this by now because it's been in this class starter for the last week, England is trying to recover from debt from the French and Indian War, in which the English colonists gained a whole lot of wealth. England wants some of that wealth. But what the English colonists also gained was valuable military experience. And England is not having that respect. Now, Mrs. Hensley is going to tell you what to do for the rest of your class. I hope this clears up a couple of things. Please feel free to watch this again, and hopefully this message will stick to you, because the events in Boston truly inspire and ignite our revolution. See you soon.